you say that AGI cannot have any test for it. So that's one of the things that is different from you compared with the mainstream view of this.
Yes.
And so then how do we know when we get AGI? Like, how do we know what kind of paths would work?
We know from theory. We know from the theory of how it works that it works. So, for example, the simple thing of it must be possible for it to just stop producing output. You might be able to prove that mathematically from the program without ever testing. If you ran this program, it might not stop. It might never stop. But you might be able to, from a mathematical specification of the AGI program, you might be able to prove mathematically that it is capable of stopping and not saying anything.
But then how do you know what path we need to take to make AGI?
Well, I don't know, but we need to make something with that property among several others.
That property, namely?
That one can prove that it is capable of not producing output. We also need to prove that it is capable of not needing input, but still continuing to think.
I would be extremely surprised if people work that way. I would have thought that input is needed to keep thinking.
So imagine a person in a sensory deprivation tank who has gone into a sensory deprivation tank because they want to be a hermit.
They still have their body, which is inputs.
Well,
they have their heart beating, breathing.
You could interrupt the nerves that go that give them sensations like that.
My guess is that if you did that, they would stop being able to think.
I don't see what would stop them.
If sensations are needed to think. So, for example, in Antonio Damasio's book, Descartes' Error, there's a thing where if you disconnect the emotional center of the brain, you then become unable to make choices. So, it takes a very long time. Like, it takes 10 minutes to decide what color pen to use, or an hour to decide where to have lunch.
So I think these are parochial facts that have nothing to do with how consciousness works or how thinking works. Of course, if you put someone in a situation that they didn't want and have no experience of, they're going to be confused and inefficient at coping with that situation. I think a bit of the contrary of that, of those experiments, are in Ramachandran's description of his patients who have brain injuries or brain disorders, which gives them wild misconceptions and inability to think. But if the person in question has a sort of philosophical frame of mind, they can eventually learn to think their way around this, just as a person who has lost the face recognition hardware in the brain can learn to recognize faces by doing it the hard way. It may never be as fast as the built-in hardware, but it'll only be slower by a constant factor.
I could imagine that if you were somewhat disabled, like you can't feel anything from the neck down, maybe, although I'm very unsure about this, maybe it would be enough to have the inputs from the sensations in your face or in your head or something. But this is also a big topic we could have a whole episode about. So,
can I just say one more thing about it? It is perfectly possible for a person to experience sensations that don't come from the body at all, that they're just imagining. And therefore, given universality, I would expect it to be possible to create that state voluntarily. So,
simulated inputs.
Yes, but they'd be actual inputs to the thinking part of the brain.
Okay.
I mean, universality is a powerful concept. It is counterintuitive in multiple ways. And you need a really watertight argument to be persuaded of it. Turing had a very nearly watertight argument. I mean, I think it was watertight before quantum computers, and now the same argument from quantum computers is totally watertight. Unless Penrose is right, but never mind that.
So you'd finished your thought on universality?
Yeah, well, universality can tell us a lot about how the mind works, but there's still a lot that it can't tell us.
Yeah.